Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Honorable, the speaker of today's lecture, Professor Dr. Anthony Reid from Australian National University, Australia. We are very honored and pleased to welcome you in our guest lecture, Professor. The Honorable Dr. Nurhayati M. the Dean of Faculty of Humanities, Diponegoro University, Indonesia. The Honorable Professor Dr. Yeti Rahulandingsi, MSc, the Head of Doctoral Program of History, Faculty of Humanities, Diponegoro University. The Honorable today's moderator, the Doctoral Candidate of History, Faculty of Humanities, Diponegoro University, Mr. Arido Laksono. Last but not least, our beloved international participants from various countries around the world. For your information, the total participants for today's seminar is 518 from 14 countries in the world. Thank you very much for your kind enthusiasm. So please welcome to our guest lecture organized by Doctoral Program of History, Faculty of Humanities, Diponegoro University, Indonesia, with the topic, Writing Indonesian History as a Fact and Fiction, Motives, Possibilities, and Problems by Professor Dr. Anthony Reid, to be held via Zoom today, August 20th, 2020.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Excellencies, the honorable guest speakers, Professor Dr. Anthony Reid from Australian National University. Good afternoon, Professor Reid. Welcome to this Diponegoro University, even though through the virtual media. Nice to meet you, Prof.
Thank you.
Yes. The Honorable all professors in the History Doctoral Program of Faculty of Humanities, Professor Dr. Yeti Rohulaningsih, MSc, Master of Science, Professor Dr. Singgih Tri Sulistiono, M.Hum, Professor Dr. Dewi Yuliati, MA, Professor Dr. Kuat Widodo, MSc, distinguished participants, the historians, all the doctoral students of history, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. In this opportunity, I want also to say hello to the three known historians, Professor Dr. Peter Carey from Oxford University. Good afternoon, Professor Carey, maybe you are here. And the second one is Professor Dr. Michael Finier from Maldives Heritage Survey, Oxford University. And good afternoon also to Professor Dr. Muhammad Samsudin from UKM, Malaysia. This is my pleasure to extend to all of you a warm welcome. So on behalf of the Faculty of Humanities, Diponegoro University, we are delighted and honored to host the general lectures with the interesting topic, Writing Indonesian History as a Fact and Fiction, Motives, Possibilities, and Problems. We are happy today because this afternoon, the lectures is attended by more or less, I see here, 196 and maybe will be more participants from 14 countries. That is very honor from me. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a very interesting topic, of course, because writing history today is not merely describing what happened in the past. The writer must position him himself or herself either as historians or as the writer of historian fictions. Niall Ferguson from Harvard's Lawrence, a Tees Professor of History, said, so please let me quote his interesting statement that historians are as much concerned with how it felt. The difference is we are actually basing it on research rather than our imaginations. People who write historical fiction are telling you what it must have felt like. But that is not what it felt like because essentially they are projecting back. This is a very interesting quote. Attending this lecture, the participants, the historians, and especially the doctoral students are expected to have new perspective regarding what should historians do as members of intellectual community. This is a model for them to face today's challenge and to adapt their practice because now they live in a multi-channel and a multifocal era that demands every person, including historians, to increase his or her creativity in conducting research and writing. Ladies and gentlemen, in this opportunity, I would like to introduce the profile of the organizer of the general lectures, that is the Doctoral Program on History with the specialization Marine History. This is the PI research program, so it accommodates the candidates that have a high motivation to get the doctoral program on history, but having problem with time and distance. This program has a 5 professors and all of them have competency in maritime history. Ladies and gentlemen, in the end of my speech, I would like to thank our university, Diponegoro University, our faculty, the Faculty of Humanities, the head of the History Department, Dr. Danang Respati Hugo MHU, the head of the Doctoral Program on History, Professor Dr. Yeti Rohbulaningsih, Master of Science, and all of the committee of this event. Our special thanks is to our guest speaker, Professor Dr. Anthony Reid. Hope that we will invite you again next time, or we'll ask you to in joint research of Indonesian history. We hope that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So by saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I open the guest lecture on writing Indonesian history as a facts and a fiction, motifs, possibilities, and problems. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the guest lecture with our honorable professor, Professor Dr. Anthony Reid, on writing Indonesian history as fact and fictions, motif, possibilities, and problems. My name is Arido Laksono, and I'm one of the students at the Doctorate Program of History, Faculty of Humanities, Diponegoro University, and I will be serving as your moderator of the guest lecture of today. You will be hearing a presentation from Professor Dr. Anthony Reid for approximately an hour, perhaps, and then we are going to have the questions and answer session. Yet, before we start the lecture, please allow me to read a brief biography of Professor Reid. So, I searched from the internet and I found an article on Tempo magazine, April 20, 2019, and it is stated that initially Anthony Reid sent his manuscript to the publisher under a pen name, an Indonesian name. The reason is because I don't want people to know me as a historian. This is going to be interesting, and Professor Reid, I think when we have further discussions on your topic of today, then these kind of questions will be very provoking for the audience to have more and more questions. And Professor Anthony Reid was born in 1939 in Wellington, New Zealand, and then he earned his BA at the Victoria University of Wellington in 1960, and then he earned his MA with first-class honor, wow, in history from Victoria University of Wellington in 1961, and Professor Reid earned his PhD in history at Cambridge in 1965. At the moment, Professor Reid is an emeritus professor, College of Asia and the Pacific, Australian National University, Canberra. And I would also like to read a brief about his research interests from several sources that I got from the internet, of course. His research interests cover history of Southeast Asia, with particular interest in Indonesia and Malaysia, early modern history, nationalism, minorities, socio-economic and religious history, and also Sumatra. And having recently completed a new history of Southeast Asia, Professor Reid is exploring the interface between history and geology in Indonesia natural disaster record. Well, there are so many books that you can find, dear audience of today's guest lecturer. But of course, time is very precious, and we have to give. Without further ado, please welcome Professor Dr. Anthony Reid, who will be speaking to us on writing Indonesian history as fact and fictions, motif, possibilities, and problems. Please, Professor Reid, time is yours.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, Professor, loud and clear.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Mas Arido and Nail, who made this contact with me and has steered me through many difficulties to understand how the Zoom works. But it seems to be working, and so thank you for that. And thank you, Ibu Dekan, and I'm glad to see also Professor Yeti and Professor Singhi here, among many others who I know and admire. Okay, so barangkali next slide is okay, we start. See if we can switch to the next slide. Ah, you did it, well done. Okay, okay. Jadi barangkali saya siapkan sesuatu dalam bahasa Indonesia. Barangkali bisa teruskan asal tidak terlalu confused. Dan sesudah itu ya kita lihat nanti ya, apakah bahasa Inggris atau bahasa Indonesia yang lebih sesuai dengan keperluan. Jadi ya, buku saya terbaru memang novel ini sedikit aneh. Barangkali hadirin akan bertanya, kenapa pindah dari sejarah akademik? Sudah lumayan karier ini dengan sejarah akademik, kenapa cari sesuatu yang baru? Saya kira sebabnya begini, saya merasa sudah puas, sudah cukup dengan buku terakhir, buku yang ke-10 dari gaya sejarah akademik, A History of Southeast Asia. Ini next slide, ya. A History of Southeast Asia, Critical Crossroads. Ini cukup lengkap. Jadi apapun yang harus saya katakan kepada sejarawan dan siswa sejarah Asia Tenggara sudah disampaikan. Sudah ada kesempatan dalam buku yang gitu tebal. Tentu saya pernah mimpi barangkali ada beberapa buku lagi yang saya harus menulis, tapi dengan ini sudah lengkapi, saya rasa. Jadi apa dan saya merasa sudah pensiun, sudah cukup waktu dengan itu, 50 jam. apa yang berikutnya. Motif pertama memilih novel tentu mencari pembaca yang lebih ramai di luar bangku perguruan tinggi. Saya merasa bahwa memang sejarah Indonesia barangkali terutama sejarah Jawa yang kurang dipahami oleh orang luar, terutama sebelum Belanda yang menguasai Jawa ini. Jadi suatu gaya untuk menarik perhatian orang yang tidak begitu berminat dalam sejarah Indonesia. Ketika saya membaca James Clavell ini, Shogun, mengenai Jepang pada waktu yang sama, abad ke-17, saya merasa iri dengan 15 juta pembacanya. Mulai bertanya, ya mengapa saya tidak dapat melakukan hal yang sama untuk Jawa? Jawa ya, menarik juga seperti Jepang. Dua-duanya pada waktu itu agak misterius kepada orang luar. Dan ini boleh dibandingkan. Kenapa tidak? Jadi saya coba menggunakan bentuk novel yang agak sama dengan Clavell itu. Jadi memilih orang Inggris yang tiba-tiba berada di Jepang pada tahun 1600. Dan ya, saya pikirkan ini barangkali selama 20 tahun. Ya, apakah ini bisa jadi atau tidak. Dan akhirnya sesudah 5 tahun yang lalu, sudah selesaikan buku lengkap sejarah Asia Tenggara, saya mulai coba. Dan dengan itu, sebenarnya tidak begitu gampang menulis novel. Menulis mudah, tapi menerbitkan itu yang sulit. Bagi saya jauh lebih gampang menerbitkan buku sejarah, buku akademik, karena baik atau buruk ada fakta yang berguna di dalamnya. Kalau novel, kalau fiksi, kalau buruknya kenapa orang mau baca? Kalau tidak ada fakta, tidak ada bahan, tidak ada data yang baru. Jutaan orang di seluruh dunia ingin menerbitkan novelnya, tetapi hanya 1 dari sejuta yang benar-benar berhasil dengan mendapatkan pembaca yang banyak. Namun demikian, ya ini barangkali tidak begitu bersukses seperti James Clavell. Namun demikian dalam proses penulisan, saya mulai menghargai banyak keuntungan lain yang diberikan fiksi kepada penulis. Selain banyak pembaca, ada keuntungan lain. Yang pertama ini, tidak perlu kesimpulan. Jadi dengan karangan akademik, karangan sejarah, kita harus katakan sesudah menilai segala sumber, ya ini yang kita hipotese kami. Begini. Tapi dengan novel boleh jadi beberapa pendapat. Cap aktor, cap karakter dalam novel ini ada idenya, pandangannya, ideologinya sendiri, dan semuanya bisa disampaikan. Tidak usah memilih untuk pembaca. Pembaca bisa memilih. Jadi, dan saya mau membacakan nanti pada akhir presentasi suatu contoh bagaimana ini dilaksanakan. Yang kedua, perempuan ini dalam sejarah akademik yang terbatas pada sumber, tertulis, memang perempuan tidak pernah cukup muncul. Dan kita lihat dalam novel sejak semula novel ini sebagai bentuk buku selalu ada perempuan yang menulis, hampir seimbang dengan laki-laki. Dan itu karena memang dengan novel mereka harus main peranan yang seimbang dengan laki. Jadi kita harus memakai imajinasi untuk memperlihatkan mereka. Tapi saya rasa dalam buku ini misalnya, saya bisa memberikan contoh sesuatu yang saya selalu mau menyampaikan. Keadaan perempuan di Asia Tenggara ini yang berbeda dari daerah lain di dunia ini. Jauh berbeda dari Cina atau India atau Arab atau Eropa. Dan ada suatu bagian dalam buku ini, ada satu bagian namanya Women as Cultural Mediators. Jadi saya coba dalam beberapa halaman itu memperlihatkan bahwa memang perempuan main peranan jauh di atas laki sebenarnya sebagai perantara antara Barat dan Timur. Karena yang datang dari Barat atau dari Arab atau dari Cina selalu laki, tapi mereka pasangan dengan perempuan lokal, dan mereka yang harus menjadi mediator. Saya sampaikan beberapa contoh fenomen itu dalam buku sejarah akademik. Tetapi dalam novel ini, dengan karakter Sri, karakter Jawa yang perempuan, saya kira ini suatu buku yang lengkap. Peranannya saya harap cukup jelas bahwa dia yang harus mendidikkan laki-laki yang hampir nol tentang kebudayaan Jawa dan Indonesia. Yang ketiga, masalah menulis yang saya katakan istilah total atau sejarah yang lengkap, termasuk sosial, ekonomi, pikiran maupun politik. Saya coba menulis sejarah seperti itu dalam Southeast Asia in the Age of Commerce, jadi Asia Tenggara dalam kurun Niaga, dan dalam buku baru ini, A History of Southeast Asia. Tetapi dengan gaya itu yang mau memberi gambar orang biasa, bukan saja tokoh utama, orang hebat yang mencantumkan nama mereka atas prasasti atau duit atau kronik, selalu laki, tapi dengan jalur sejarah akademik ada batasan. Kami risikonya, bahayanya dengan aspirasi ini untuk memperlihatkan keprihatinan sehari-hari orang biasa adalah bahwa individu hilang. Karena individu seperti Sultan Agung atau seperti Iskandar Muda, ya mereka hanya laki yang kuat. Tapi orang umum bagaimana tanpa kehilangan individu sepenuhnya. Jadi dengan novel saya kira bisa menggambarkan peranan individu secara imajinasi, bagaimana orang biasa hidup, makan, berpakaian, dan bercinta. Tapi tentu ada juga bahaya romantis. Si novelis harus membuat tokoh-tokohnya menarik bagi pembaca modern, dan dalam prosesnya ia selalu bisa meromantisasi serta mempesona mereka. Itu hampir pasti akan jadi dengan gaya novel, dan saya rasa karakter Sri dalam buku ini memang ada sedikit romantisasi, idealisasi yang terjadi. Oke, jadi kita sampai, ya, oke. Bahaya bagi sejarawan yang menulis novel sejarah. Saya memang berusaha bersembunyi peranan Anthony Reid, Profesor Anthony Reid, ahli sejarah akademik. Karena saya mau bahwa orang Indonesia, orang yang tahu buku saya tidak confused, tidak merasa ini satu lagi buku Anthony Reid, buku sejarah Anthony Reid. Dan juga bahwa tertarik bahwa ini lebih mudah di akses. Dan memang benar yang dikatakan tadi oleh penerusi bahwa saya coba nama palsu, saya coba pakai nama Jerry tulis yang sebenarnya bukan nama ciptaan, tapi nama yang dipakai untuk juru tulis oleh orang Inggris yang ada di Indonesia pada waktu itu, di sekitar Asia. Mereka menggantikan itu dengan Jerry tulis seperti namanya. Jadi saya merasa seperti itu, juru tulis. Tapi tidak ada penerbit yang mau menerbitkan buku ini, novel ini, kecuali dengan nama Anthony Reid. Saya gagal. Saya gagal. Harus pakai Tony Reid yang plan B. Ini lebih berat masalah ini untuk memisahkan novel dari sejarah akademik. Dan mungkin benar bahwa saya masih punya sifat sejarawan, terlalu bersemangat untuk membuat poin sejarah dalam novel ini. Mungkin inilah alasan mengapa hanya sedikit sejarawan yang menjadi novelis, yang bisa menulis novel yang sukses. Saya pikirkan di mana di seluruh dunia ada novelis yang besar yang sukses, yang mulai sebagai ahli sejarah. Ada yang saya pikirkan. Barangkali ada satu dua tapi tidak begitu sukses. Dan ada lebih banyak ahli antropologi yang terlatih secara akademis seperti Amitav Ghosh atau dengan di Indonesia ini Nigel Bali cukup sukses, sedikit sukses. Mereka melakukan transisi ke novel yang diteliti dengan baik hanya dengan beberapa karakter diubah atau ditambahkan dan banyak detail yang jelas, percakapan dan romansa. So, okay, next slide. Where are we? Ini yang ke-6. Bukan, ya sebelumnya. Ya, sebelumnya. Ya, ini. Apakah keahlian sejarah untung atau rugi untuk menulis fiksi. Tentu ada untungnya. Untungnya pengetahuan sejarah tentang untung. Tidak usah dibuktikan. Antara kritik saya yang saya baca, memang tidak ada yang mengeluh bahwa sejarah ini salah. Walaupun saya gelisah, waktu menulis, saya selalu gelisah. Saya pikirkan, barangkali Peter Carey akan membaca, barangkali Mel Reckless akan membaca, barangkali siapa lagi akan membaca dan menilai salah. Tetapi sebenarnya tidak ada. Tidak usah. Yang mengeluh, ada yang mengeluh bahwa ini memang terlalu bersifat sejarah. Ada yang bilang, it's more like history than a novel. So, masih seperti di bangku sekolah, bangku kuliah. Jadi, untung itu ada balasnya. Keinginan sampaikan pengetahuan ini, inilah yang ada hambatan saya rasa. Pernah ada waktu saya berambisius sekali untuk novel ini, saya mau terbit dengan penerbit yang besar sekali, Random House. Saya pernah dinasihatkan oleh pegawai Random House itu, penerbit besar, tinggalkan novel ini selama 1 tahun, lantas kembali dan membuang tiap detail yang mau sampaikan sesuatu dari sejarah. Yang tinggal, barangkali ada novel yang baik. Jadi, tetapi rupanya sejarawan tetap sejarawan. Walaupun saya coba menulis fiksi. Dari segi saya, tak ada guna menulis apabila dilarang sampaikan gambar sejarah. Jadi, konflik ada. Konflik antara sifat sejarawan dan sifat novelis yang sebenarnya. Oke, garis antara fiksi dan sejarah. Next slide. Memang tidak begitu jelas. So, dibanding ilmu pasti, garis antara fiksi dan sejarah tidak begitu jelas. Dari segi metode, ilmu pasti boleh pakai bukan saja peer review, kami juga punya peer review, tetapi juga eksperimen. Eksperimen dengan hasil yang bisa diulangi oleh peneliti lain. Itu yang berbeda dari gaya ilmu pasti dengan gaya kita sebagai sejarawan. Dengan sejarah, fakta tetap fakta, tetapi pemilihan fakta sangat personal, sangat subjektif. Tiap gambar masa lalu adalah penyederhanaan kerumitan masa lalu yang tak terbatas. It's an infinite complexity in the real past. Every picture we take from the past is a simplification. Pengalaman menulis novel membuat saya semakin sadar bahwa menulis sejarah dalam bentuk apapun melibatkan banyak kreativitas dalam memilih alur cerita yang memiliki makna. Jadi kalau kita memang berusaha hanya menyampaikan fakta yang 100% fakta, ya menjadi statistik barangkali, statistik bisa. Tapi mulai menerangkan dalam kata, kita harus memilih antara jutaan fakta sejarah. Ahli sejarah boleh, memang harus memilih bukti yang paling relevan, tetapi tidak dapat menyajikan cerita atau fakta yang tidak punya bukti. Itu yang batasan. Jadi menciptakan fakta baru itu yang sifat fiksi. Dialog atau pemikiran interior, dua-duanya adalah alat penting bagi pengarang novel. Tetapi ya hampir boleh kata dilarang untuk sejarawan. Jarang dapat diakses dalam sumber sejarah yang sebenarnya sumber. Saya bilang kepada ada mahasiswa yang kerja sama saya tentang penciptaan sejarah atau gambar di Aceh. Dan ternyata sumber yang digunakan oleh semua adalah novel, bukan buku sejarah. Karena ada dialog dalam buku luas yang diterjemahkan oleh ILMU, ada dialog dan ada pemikiran interior. Jadi dua-duanya ini berarti tidak boleh tidak diakui, diterima sebagai sejarah akademik. Okay, the next slide. Perspektif dan plot. Metode yang saya pakai dalam Mataram, seperti saya katakan tadi, adalah mengungkap Jawa tahun 1600-an secara bertahap dari sudut pandang Hodges, pelaut Inggris yang mencari lada di Indonesia ini, dengan English East India Company. Dia di Banten, dia jatuh cinta dengan Sri, orang Banten tapi latar belakangnya Jawa, ada sedikit Cina juga, tapi orang Jawa yang ada di Banten. Dan mereka bersama jalan ke Mataram lewat Jepara. Mataram itu untuk Banten pun agak misterius. Baru mulai kuat, tapi sangat sulit disampaikan dari pantai, dari pesisir. Sebelum naiknya Sultan Agung memang sedikit sekali diketahui oleh orang luar. Karena itu memang fakta sejarah dari periode ini agak sedikit. Saya lebih bebas barangkali karena itu. Jadi pembaca menemui kebudayaan Jawa lewat mata Hodges. Sedikit seperti saya pun pernah menemui Jawa itu dari luar, mulai dari nol, tapi dengan pengalaman lama-lama mulai ngerti sedikit. Ini proses untuk pembaca. Kenapa pandangan Inggris itu dengan novel tentang Jawa? Sebenarnya orang Eropa main peranan sedikit sekali. Orang Inggris hampir tidak ada di Jawa Tengah di periode ini. Jawaban itu jelas, karena saya harap dapat membaca banyak dalam bahasa Inggris. Jadi untuk orang Inggris atau orang yang berbahasa Inggris yang membaca dalam bahasa Inggris harus identifikasikan dengan mata Hodges ini. Itu idenya, tapi ternyata boleh dikata tidak sukses. No chance of 15 million readers. Tidak mungkin dapat 15 juta pembaca. Seperti James Clavell. 15.000 sudah belum tentu. Jadi karena sebagian besar pembaca sudah punya minat pada Indonesia, soal muncul bagaimana buku ini akan diterima oleh pembaca Indonesia. Saya tidak menuju pembaca Indonesia, tapi ternyata sebagian besar pembaca atau orang Indonesia atau orang yang sudah ada minat untuk ini. Saya mau menarik perhatian orang yang tidak berminat pada Indonesia, tapi ternyata hampir tak jadi. Ada beberapa kawan saya yang memang berharap menarik ini jawab, tapi tidak seperti diharapkan. Jadi belum ada terjemahan bahasa Indonesia, ada kontrak, ada program, tapi tidak begitu. Barangkali ada blok. Tapi saya harap barangkali dapat terjemahan yang imaginatif, yang bisa memberi terjemahan supaya pembaca Indonesia sempat memperlihatkan keadaan kontak pertama Barat dan Timur. Keadaan yang lebih seimbang dibanding abad yang berikutnya. Okay, so next slide. Ya. Silakan. Ini latar belakang pembacaan. Saya akan membaca sedikit dari buku dalam bahasa Inggris. Ternyata karena belum diterjemahkan. Dan ini ini gambarnya boleh baca sendiri yang saya katakan di sini. Contoh. Ini suatu debat antara beberapa tokoh agama di depan Raja Penembahan Kerapyak dan anaknya yang akan menjadi Sultan Agung, tapi saya namakan Anggalaga dalam logo dalam buku ini. Sebelum menjadi Sultan Agung ya, ada beberapa nama, tapi ini satunya. So gambar yang ada di sini di sebelah kanan bukan dari Jawa, ini dari India zaman Sultan Mughal, Sultan Akbar yang duduk di sana dalam baju kuning. Itu Sultan Akbar yang sedikit sebelum Sultan Agung di Jawa, tapi dia panggil beberapa tokoh agama untuk membahas masalah agama. Kita perlukan keadaan agama yang menyatukan, bukan yang memisahkan. Jadi bagaimana kita bisa menarik bahwa sebenarnya Akbar coba untuk menyatukan atas dasar sinkretis, menyatukan India dengan agama yang sinkretis antara beberapa elemen. Tapi Sultan Agung yang berhasil, walaupun tidak terkenal di dunia seperti, tapi dia yang memang ada cukup kuat dan cukup kecil negaranya supaya bisa menciptakan suatu formula, suatu definisi agama yang sempat menyatukan. Tapi ini sebelum itu, jauh sebelum Sultan Agung, masih ada banyak perpisahan antara agama di Jawa waktu ini. dan saya pinjam contoh ini dari India ke Jawa. Dan ada, ya, di paragraf pertama di sini ada 4 tokoh agama dari Islam, dari Rusia atau Tapat Jawa, dari tokoh Katolik, Jesuit, dan Hodges sendiri yang tidak tahu banyak tentang agama. Dia orang bisnis, orang yang mau cari untung, tapi toh dia di situ dan mewakili agama Protestan yang dibawa Belanda. Belanda lebih menonjol waktu itu untuk orang Jawa, jelas. Jadi kenapa orang Belanda dan orang Portugis saling berkelahi, selalu berkelahi, kita harus mengerti. Oke, jadi Hodges dibawa sebagai wakil Kristen Protestan, boleh dikatakan. Tapi juga barangkali dia mewakili pandangan modern, pandangan yang agak skeptis, yang agak mau cari ilmu pasti yang baru, yang a Renaissance man who is not so enthusiastic about religious conformity. Okay, so I'm going to read a few pages, which I think may be available to you also. So begins with the Kiai who is working for the king to organize this event. The Kiai seemed to be more than just a contestant in the debate. He began the proceedings after appropriate salutations to the king, and the prince. That's Ngalogo, later Sultan. Sri whispered a summary to Hodges. He is explaining why this meeting is being held. The king desires harmony in the land. He will not allow fighting over religion, as has happened elsewhere. He perceives you have different interpretations of what God, that is, what he said, Sangyang, meaning God, of course, much debate about what word to use for God, requires of men. Sri interpreted. Can all your beliefs be trusted to live together peacefully, or must the king select one and banish those who disagree? Or perhaps we can agree on a Javanese way that combines the best of what you each offer. Since the king already accepts Islam, we will ask Kiai Ustad Ahmad to begin. The Muslim leader began with his own elaborate tribute to the king and praise for the divine wisdom that had led him and his father to recognize the universal truth of Islam. What he said is, there is no need for other religions. They are relics of an older time, before God revealed his full intentions for man in the Quran. Whatever wisdom Buddha and Jesus brought was superseded by the greater truth of Islam. Now that the kingdom has accepted Islam, it is subject to the law of God. This law generously allows older places of different worship to continue for a time, for it may take several generations for all to accept the truth of the Quran. But the divine law does not allow new places of false worship, such as the Ferengi or the Chinese may wish to establish here. To allow them would only confuse and divide your subjects. As your majesty and your successors set the noble example you have done, all must eventually come to this sacred truth. Next, it was the turn of the long-haired ascetic to the left, whom Sri described as a tapa, famed for meditating in holy sites for long periods, and for his profound but often obscure utterances. She strained to understand what he was saying. And then she attempted to translate like this. He seems to mean that the last speaker showed ignorance of the wisdom of Java. The king's ancestors understood that there are many ways to represent the ultimate reality, including the way of Buddha, the way of Shiva, and his own higher way of the Risi, Javanese ascetics. Even these new ideas of the Muslims and the Christians have some of the truth, but when they say they have the whole truth, they must be mistaken, for they know nothing of the wisdom of Java. Ever since Ajisaka came here, long before these other new teachers of foreign ways, the gods, have resided among us in Java. We know their profound teachings, including the wisdom of Arjuna, taught in the Wayang. If you depart from the beliefs of your ancestors to follow some foreign idea, the very soil of Java will show the gods' anger. Volcanic eruptions and floods will swallow the earth, and your glorious dynasty will not prosper. Now it was Romo's turn. This is the Catholic, Wakil Catholic. Sri had no trouble with his bookish Javanese vocabulary and the slow, careful way he spoke. And she translated. And so, like the first speaker, I worship one God alone, creator and sustainer of all that is. We may call him as we wish, Allah, or Dewata, or Gusti. But like the second speaker, I have come to see that we cannot confine him in a single tradition, or dogma, or language, or form of words. We Europeans have wounded him by fighting too much over how to define him and the way to him. God, who is beyond all definition, has punished us for the sin of killing one another in his name. We have learned from that sad experience, as Your Majesty has learned from the fighting between Muslims and Javanese. The path to God is not fighting, but rather forgiveness and humility. Now our great thinkers see that we need to learn from one another and not forbid any way that may lead to him. The first leader of our church after Jesus already understood that God has no favorites, but in every nation, everyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. My Muslim friend is mistaken in thinking that you can or should exclude other paths once you accept Islam. Our world has become one. The paths to God practiced in different places must now learn from each other, as I have learned in Java. They should not exclude each other and build walls between people. That can only lead to more misunderstanding and wars. The Europeans know little of Muhammad or Buddha. The Arabs know little except their Islam. If you allow me to build a church here and teach the ways of Jesus, Java will know all the great ways to God and can set an example to the world of learning from each other in peace. Jesus teaches the path of love, forgiveness, and humility. Since God loves us enough to forgive our terrible sins, he shows us how to forgive one another. It was now Hodge's turn. He spoke quickly in Portuguese, knowing that Sri already, the common language between Sri and Hodges, they're two lovers, man and wife, is Portuguese. But I treat, of course, Portuguese as if it was English. I'm writing it in English. But of course, all this conversation is taking place in Javanese, and Sri is translating it for Hodges. He spoke quickly in Portuguese, knowing that Sri already had the Javanese words prepared to sound right. Romo and I share the teaching of Jesus, but not the way to govern that teaching. Despite his sweet words, the church Romo serves acts as though there is only one truth, which it seeks to enforce. England and Holland have rejected that tyranny, and as a result, they have gained a new freedom to explore many new ideas. We have come to see that reason and careful observation are also paths to understand the glory of God through his creation. Every day we gain new knowledge of the stars, the earth, the human body, as well as mathematics and printing and logic. Your Majesty should allow the Christians to come to your kingdom and teach their own faith, because they will also teach many new things about the world. But please be careful not to allow one path to exclude the others, as Romo's church has done in many countries in Europe. Kiai Wirajaya now took charge of the discussion, allowing each speaker to rebut the criticisms of the others, while himself probing what the teachings were about. Hodges was surprised how far Romo went in admitting the mistakes of the Roman Catholic Church, trying to show that wisdom came in learning from mistakes. But the sharpest exchanges were between the Muslim, Ustad, and the long-haired ascetic over the gods displayed in the Wayang and the old temples of Java. Ustad demanded that these be banished as the work of the devil, and Hodges found himself supporting this position. They belonged to a superstitious past. The Tapak insisted that they were the essence of Javanese wisdom, and Romo made the same case, more clearly than the ascetic himself. Romo said, "This wisdom has accumulated in Java for centuries. It is only found here. God's purpose could not be that you destroy this precious storehouse. You must treasure it, but complement and fulfill it with wisdom from elsewhere." There was a growl from the Panembahan, Krapya. Budayaya was quickly at his side and conveyed his demands to the group. "His Majesty wishes to know the place of the king in the paths that each of you upheld." Hodges was taken aback by being asked to go first, reversing the initial order. He hoped Sri could make his stumbling attempts to answer this sound more coherent in Javanese. "We, English, pray for our king every time we assemble in church on Sunday. In other countries, perhaps they should do the same. The King of England is the head of both the state and the church, placed there by the grace of God." He stopped there, not knowing how to apply this idea safely to Java. Now the tables were turned. While the translations were taking place, Romo had time to consider how to dissent from Hodges' position. He said, "The Christian tradition from which England has diverged is that God has ordained two kinds of authority, temporal and spiritual. Kings are ordained by God to defend and govern their realms, but the spiritual is a different domain in which each individual must find his own way to God, aided by wise teachers. Because God is only one throughout the universe, Christians have sought to bring God's wisdom and revelation together from many countries into a universal church. But it is not yet truly universal, because we are only now learning the wisdom of Java, China, and elsewhere in Asia. The church has no power to judge or punish. Christians and their leaders may only advise the divinely ordained king, serve him, and pray for him constantly." The Tapak took a very different tack. Sri had trouble following his arcane language, and Hodges kept asking her if he could really be meaning what he seemed to be saying. And Sri translated his difficult ideas like this. "Like the great kings of Java before you, Arlanga, Jayabaya, Ayamuruk, you are divine. You are the lord of the great mountain, the consort of the queen of the southern sea, Nyala Rokido. You are Arjuna, you are Shiva, and you may also become Buddha as you mature in your journey of meditation and asceticism. You hold the kingdom in your hands." Ustad Aman grew visibly uncomfortable as he also struggled to understand what the ascetic was saying. He responded slowly and soberly. "Only Allah is God. We humans, even kings and the Prophet himself, are all men. The king is the shadow of God on earth. Your Majesty's power comes directly from God. Only you possess the wahyu, the divine inspiration that God bestows on Muslim rulers. Only Islam can unite your realm, because only Allah is God and he asks all to submit to him. That is Islam." The king had had enough. He walked out without further comment, followed by the prince. So that's an example, suatu contoh apa yang mungkin dengan novel, yang tidak mungkin dengan sejarah akademik, untuk memperlihatkan beberapa point of view, beberapa pandangan lewat karakter masing-masing. Oke, cukup. Barangkali sudah waktunya. You can see where I am, it is getting dark. And if I look out the window, that's Canberra out there. It will soon be dark. But sudah waktu untuk persoalan, saya rasa. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Professor Reid. This is very interesting. And if we look at the screens, there are more than 200 participants today. And I can sum up a bit about what Professor Reid has taught us today. He said earlier that writing is easy, but when you try to publish, that's a problem. And then also, he also explained that novel has the advantage of describing the role of individual freely. But still, a novelist has to create or narrate the characters of the novels interestingly and enchantingly. And he also explained that not so many historians are really successful in writing fictions because there are more anthropologists or some artists who are successfully in writing a novel. And Professor Reid also read some of his pages of the novels Mataram, and that was very interesting because there are so many religious differences, religious dispute among religions in Java in their times. So I think we come to the questions and answer session. If anyone would like to ask questions, simply raise your hands or you can write on the chat room. Anyone? Who do we have? Okay, we have Ms. Nina Yutasari, please.
Thank you. Can you hear my voice?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Pa Anthony. It's nice to have you in this occasion. So I do enjoy the presentation that you give to us. And is it okay with my audio?
Yes, yes, it's good, perfect.
Okay. So I have a question for you. That is, how did you observe the historiography of Indonesia laterally? Where it will be going to? It's just to price some period in the past, or is it going to digging some hidden fact that potentially raise much problem in the future? I think I will start our discuss with that question first. Thank you.
Okay, I think we let Professor Reid to answer the questions directly. Professor Reid?
I think I'm not sure I understand what you're asking me. It seems like you want me to say what the future of Indonesian history writing will be. And I think that's for you to know, not for me. I'm encouraged that in my time, over 50 years, there has been big improvement in the way historians have become professional and competent and developing their craft very effective, increasingly effectively. But I suppose I'm worried for your historians, as I am worried for historians in Australia and several other countries, that they are becoming more marginalized in the process of educating students. Fewer students, I think, smaller percentage of students study history than study so many other things. We now have so many different disciplines. Maybe everybody does a little bit of history in there when they study international relations, or they study business, or they study something. But the actual profession of history as a university academic subject, I fear is not doing very well at the moment, which is surprising because it is the one academic discipline that is the most accessible to ordinary people. We do not have a jargon. We do not have a complicated technical language. It's very hard for ordinary people to understand astrophysics or to understand genetics or something. You can't do it. But what the stories we are telling are accessible and important. And yet we haven't quite found a way to mediate that into what students can see as leading to a good job. This is a problem, but I'm not sure if that's what you wanted me to say, but anyway, we do face a little bit of a problem here compared with past periods when history was perhaps rather central as part of the training of people, young people.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Reid. Miss Nina Witasari,
Yes.
is it okay with you now?
Yeah. I monitor very well.
Okay.
Thank you, Pak Rido. And maybe I will continue my discuss with Pak Anthony in the next session, maybe. Please
Thank you.
turn to
Thank you. That's very wise of you then. Okay, now we have a second question from Yasmin Kairunisa. Please, Miss Yasmin. Jasmine Kairunisa, please. Jasmine.
Hello? Hello?
Yes,
can you hear my voice? Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Jasmine from Indonesia. I'm a historical fiction author, since 2017, and I'm using Wattpad to publish my works. Well, finally, after being rejected by several publishers, I will have my first novel published soon about Sriwijaya Empire. And I do learn a lot from you today, Professor, and your lecture convinced me to pursue this path. But I have some concerns here. First, I wrote this actually to kill my boredom, but nowadays I feel a little bit pressured because the readers keep on messaging me, asking about various historical issues and lessons that are not even my expertise. So like the great thing is, of course, like when some readers say that they're going to pursue a career as a historian or like they want to enter the historical department. But the problems are, that I'm not a historian, and sometimes historical materials are quite limited in Indonesia, and data are not always available for us who do not have such access to local university library or government data. So it is a little bit challenging for us to write with this limited information. So to what extent can we run our imagination run free? And moreover, like I realized that there is a lack of assistance to help us to enter the global market. So can you give us some piece of advice about this? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jasmine. Professor Reid, can you listen to Jasmine? I'm sorry.
Sure, yes, no problem. Yes.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your novel. You've been very, I don't know how long you had to try before you got published, but it's well done. I did fear this for myself also, being probably unique because perhaps the idea of academic history or professional history is not so well rooted in Indonesia as in some other places. I notice it particularly in Aceh, where so people are, in a way, they're often called gila sejarah, orang Aceh gila sejarah. They love it. But sometimes when you question why they do it, you know, why they came with the idea they wrote, it's like a dream. Okay, I had a dream, so it must be like this. Yeah, the distinction which I worry about in the West is I think more of a danger in Indonesia, that, as you say, people are haus sejarah. They want, there is not enough written, and what is taught in school, the story of the pahlawan nasional and so forth, is tipis sekali. It is really not very helpful in making people think, making people understand what is serious history from which can all be attributed to real sources, as opposed to what is speculation or ideas and the area of fiction. So I understand what you're saying. Whether, I mean, ideally, you don't have to answer all these people. You can just tell them, why don't you read this, this, and this book, you know, to get that answer. But of course, I'm guessing that your answer will be more useful than many other people that they might ask. But after all, if you become successful as a novelist with thousands and maybe tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of readers, you cannot possibly answer everybody's letter. I mean, if you try to write to a very popular writer, I mean, I think of Hilary Mantel, who writes History of England, historical novels about England. She sells probably millions of copies too, and she's writing now. Or Amitav Ghosh, it's the same. No, they won't answer any letters. You can't even know how to write to them. So as you, it's not your job to do that. Perhaps it is the job of the Jurusan Sejarah of Undip you should refer them to to the good historians of Universitas Diponegoro. Maybe that's the answer. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Reid. So I think for Miss Jasmine, it's quite clear that Professor Reid would like you to move forward, and you didn't have to answer all those questions. Just do yourself. I think that's very great. Okay, now we have lots of questions, Professor, for you. It is very interesting and challenging. We have here Yasmin Kairunisa. Okay, Miss Yasmin, you can speak up now.
Okay.
Miss Yasmin?
Yes, can you hear me? Hello.
Hello.
Yes, hello.
Okay, so I have questions for Professor Reid. The first one is regarding when you wrote the novel. So I believe that there is an understanding that novel can be so imaginative, and I do believe that you think about that too. However, as a historian, was there any sense of inconvenience or uncomfortable, the feeling of uncomfortable when you write the novels? For example, when you wrote the plot or the conversation, because as we know in history, everything should be based on evidence. But in writing novel, it can be so imaginative. Did you feel anything that you think uncomfortable? And if yes, how did you solve the feeling of inconvenience? And then, in your opinion, Professor Reid, how far fiction can be tolerated in history novel? Thank you.
Okay. No doubt. Is it okay if I speak now? It's okay. You can hear.
Yes, yes, please.
That last
Professor,
question.
please.
The last question is, of course, there is a lot of history in historical novels. It's slightly frustrating, I suppose, that people are really very interested in history. But why do they read James Clavell, who wrote Shogun, or Hilary Mantel, who writes about, you know, English history, and they don't read you or me? They don't read the professional historians. I mean, that's very frustrating. But of course, the writers who succeed as historical novelists, who are very good, it is quite largely because they convince people that this is really what happened, that it is really a very believable picture of the past. So, I mean, Hilary Mantel is an extreme case. She writes about the kings of England at the time when they were moving from a sort of, you know, one religion to another, changing into this kind of national English church idea headed by the king. And it's always a very fascinating, but she has dozens, maybe many historical characters who are all historical characters. I think all her characters are actually present, characters who we know, for whom there is plenty of evidence. So she has done lots of homework. So, and people like her for that. But then, of course, she creates conversation, she creates interior ideas and thoughts, she creates a character that is sympathetic and likable, and that you know what their anxieties are, what their loves are, and passions. So that's an easy question to answer. The discomfort, yeah, I think I mentioned that probably the main discomfort I have is that I am really, I think Indonesian history is fascinating, is absolutely wonderful, and it's so little known. I mean, it's exciting to be in that field because so few people are writing in a way that, you know, gets a lot of readers. And so, I mean, it's just partly why a novel about Indonesia doesn't get a lot of readers, because Indonesia is, people like to read about something they more or less know something about already, but would like to know more. And people don't know, people outside Indonesia don't know a lot about Indonesia. I think it was a previous, Jasmine was asking what we can do to get known outside Indonesia. And I mean, in a way, I suppose the answer probably is to find a theme that people do know and care about, a global theme. And so when, I mean, it's difficult, this issue, but, you know, when Indonesia became the special country for the Frankfurt Book Fair 3 years ago, was it? No, 5 years ago, because it was the 50th anniversary of 1965, I think. And it was really because of the anniversary of Gestapo and the massacres. And the world is interested in that awful killings and how Indonesia dealt with that or did not deal with that adequately. So the writers who were writing about that, like Lakshmi Pamuncak, for example, or a number of others, were the ones who got translated and who got celebrated in in Germany at the Frankfurt Fair, translated a lot. In other words, it's partly that showing how to link your story or the story you want to tell with something that people already know and care about. So, for example, in even Australian literature, but Western literature in general, the Holocaust, the killing of the Jews in Germany and Poland and so forth, is something everybody cares about. So it's amazing how many successful novels have used that in some way to link that with something, even Australian history, you know, some refugee, a survivor of the Holocaust, then is mixed up with a later story. But in terms of discomfort, no, writing conversation, I actually found quite liberating. I had difficulty at first. The first, you know, couple of chapters, it was hard, but I eventually found I liked that. I liked the chance to have a conflict, you know, between two points of view, and to describe it through a debate or a argument. Because often in our own heads we have the same conflict, you know, between this view and that view, and it's quite nice, I found, to be able to try to shift from one persona, one character to another. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Reid. Well, everyone here, please be patient. We have more than 200 participants and we have a lot of questions. So please be patient. Of course, I will give you opportunity to ask questions to Professor Reid. Next, we have here Mr. Tim Hannigan. Okay. Mr. Tim Hannigan, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, please. Perfect.
Very good. Thank you very much for a fascinating talk, Professor Reid. I'm Tim Hannigan. I'm not a historian. I'm a literature scholar from University of Leicester and now Athlone Institute of Technology, but I also write narrative history books. So that was what my question was about. I wondered if you could say something about the distinction between academic history and historical fiction and narrative or pop history. And I wondered whether you were attracted to the idea of writing narrative history and why you didn't go that route. In narrative history, you can use many of the techniques of fiction. You can use plot, you can focus on character, but you don't stray into total invention, and you can potentially retain scholarly rigor, potentially be used as a source by historians that come after. So I wondered why, as a professional historian, you didn't go that route instead of writing a wholly fictionalized novel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tim Hannigan.
Good question. One difference is that I chose quite early, I suppose, because of the example of Clavel. It was always there, this sense that Java is somewhat similar to Japan, just so much less well known. I kind of wanted to do that period. But I suppose you might say, and I often think this in relation to Hilary Mantel, that, my God, she worked hard. She gave herself a hard job because so much is known about this. I mean, when you write about a period that is extremely well known, you really have to, and you write a kind of narrative history trying not to invent things. You really have to know your stuff. One of the beauties of Southeast Asian history in general, before the 20th century, is it's a lot of murky stuff in there which we don't really know too much about. And I suppose maybe that's a lazy way out. To pick, I picked a period which almost everything is possible, really. I mean, it's I mentioned earlier that you know, I did look over my shoulder to one or two historians that maybe know more than I do about this. But they do know more. Some of them, I mean, some of them know Javanese, of course, and that's already a big step. But that's not the problem. Really, there is not. There's so much that is not known. So perhaps that gave more room for. If you like, it's a bigger step, isn't it? If I could have written, and I mean, maaf kepada kawan dari Aceh. I see there are a few people from Aceh who might ask, why didn't you write about Aceh? Because I know more about Aceh. I mean, at least I'm supposed to know more about Aceh. Yeah, I've written more about Aceh, but I've actually lived more in Central Java than in Aceh. But, you know, if I had taken something I had already written about it, I knew a lot about it, and then fictionalized. And there are historians who do that, who sort of write, you know, in a sense, ever more. Simon Sharma is one, and even Jonathan Spence on China, who write more and more imaginatively until you're starting to feel maybe this is becoming fiction. But that, I mean, that's not different enough. I want to do something different. And I haven't done the intermediate steps of trying to write something like a popular biography or to make some character really live well. Leonard Blusay, who's a Dutch historian, has done that. I mean, the only person I can think of in the sort of Western writers on Indonesia who've done that well. Perhaps I was misled by Clavel, or no, I had fun. And it's not, I'm not a young person like yourself who's trying to make a career and has a future. I realized that as soon as I start dealing with publishers and realize publishers think a first novel, they're always going to lose money. So they don't, why would they take a novel, a first novel, by an old geezer who hasn't got a future? I mean, you've got to pick a winner, pick Hilary Mantel when she's 25 years old, or somebody like that. And that's how you get published, by promising, well, you know, it'll build. But no, so this is just one shot, and I enjoyed it. But I'm not giving you any guidance along those lines. So what do you write? What kinds of narrative history?
Excuse me? Professor Reid, can you
I can hear you.
Okay.
But I just tried to ask him a question, but that's not so easy, whether he can answer.
Mr. Tim Hannigan, you have to unmute your microphone.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, you can hear me now. You have to unmute me. Thank you. That was a great answer. I write narrative history about Indonesia mainly, actually. So I wrote a brief history of Indonesia. I wrote a book about Raffles, a brief history of Bali.
Oh, okay. Yes,
also some stuff on South Asia. And I always have to make a point of saying I'm not a historian. I always get introduced as a historian. I'm a literature scholar in my own background. But I'm always, people have often said to me, why don't you write a historical novel? And I like to retain that anchor in non-fiction. So I was really curious as to why a professional historian had, as you say, gone the whole way, jumped the whole way in.
Yeah, that was, yeah, I haven't gone gradually like Simon Sharma. Yeah.
That was a great answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Reid, and also thank you, Mr. Tim Hannigan. We have more questions waiting here. Now we have question from, which one? Wait, YBT. YBT? Miss or Mr.? No one? Where is? I don't think we have here. So I think let's move to The next questions from Mr. I think Haidar Trisna. Mr. Haidar Trisna. Do we have here Mr. Haidar Trisna? No? It's not here? Maybe I would like to read, Professor Reid, from the chat room here. Haidar Trisna Tanaya is asking, how historical novels writer can show the fact and not fact to reader. Maybe he means that something which is considered as fact and not fact. Professor Reid, sorry, sorry.
How can they show facts, or how can they show the flag? Facts, is it?
Yes, fact and not fact.
I think it's quite common to, at the end, to say what is fact. That's what I do. At the end of the novel, I explain that, you know, these characters are fictional, these other characters are factual, and that this is what happened. You know, this is what happened afterwards, and Sultan Agung became important, and he, you know, created this kind of syncretic agama Jawa. I think that that's one way to do it. It's the most common way, and you often see at the end of a movie. I mean, the movie likes to say this is based on history, but of course it's always invented lots of romance and action and so forth that nobody could possibly know. And sometimes they say, well, this is what happened to this character that we have fictionalized. I think enough on that. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Reid, and I hope Mr. Haidar can get the point here. And the next question comes from, I would like to read from the chat room here, Freta Octarina. So she said here, Professor Reid, you are talking about writing, and I'm interested in writing about periodization in history. As you wrote the book, Southeast Asia in the Early Modern Era, I would like to ask which term, modern, you use. As we know, the use of the term modern in history refers to a time period from a Western point of view. So in my opinion, you are using a Western perspective when discussing Asian history in your book. Meanwhile, the history of the East has its own space and periodization. In other words, I think that the term modern in Asian history cannot be used in parallel with Western time frames. Please, a word from you. Thank you. That's from Freta Octarina.
Okay, thank you. So this is not talking about Tony Reid, the fiction writer, but Anthony Reid, who has written quite a lot about this kind of periodization. I hope it's not, I mean, of course, it's quite likely that I'm influenced by Western historical categories, but I do reject strongly the way some, a surprising number of writers, including some Asian writers, want to divide history between ancient, medieval, modern. I mean, medieval and ancient don't make any sense. However, modern, I think, does make sense. I have perhaps changed over the years in how I see this. As you know, I invented a term, the Age of Commerce, Kurunyaga, to explain a period which I believe did arise out of Southeast Asian reality. And so I wanted to give it a different name from modern stuff. But I also, we need categories which are in some sense global, which we can enable, because we now live in a unified planet, and the unity of that planet has to be asserted. We cannot pretend that we don't care about everybody else. We only care about Java. We only care about France. We have to think globally. And for me now, I see early modern and full modernity as being a meaningful thing globally. The early modernity begins in my age of commerce. It's the time, if you like, when everybody globally is in contact with everybody else. So, it's the first time really people in the middle of South America are impacted by what people in China or people in Africa are doing. It's nobody can be unaware or unaffected by global things. So that began somewhere in the 16th century. But as I see, that period is very exciting. That's why I wrote the novel about it. The first contact, the first dealing with strange concepts from the other side of the world. And it lasts for a century or two. And then you have a kind of reaction where, what I call now, in the newest book, I call it vernacularization. When there is a kind of reaction against these global ideas, and that has to be, and this happens in Southeast Asia in the 17th century, it happens quite widely in the 17th century, actually, in Japan, certainly, many other places. You have a shift to a more self-sufficient, conscious rejection of much of that international global ideas, which were too threatening, too difficult to absorb. So you have, and then in Southeast Asia, in Asia in general, it really only comes about 1900, when everybody wants to be modern the way the Europeans are. They defined modernity then suddenly as, modernity we know, it's 20th century modernity. When that starts in Europe is harder to say, but it seems to me it starts very quickly. It's very sudden, the transition. That's how I see it. But I talk too much on this subject when really we're supposed to be talking about fiction and so on. But and that's that's all out there in what I've written. And I guess the most recent book, The History of Southeast Asia, does emphasize, I want to emphasize, early modernity, full modernity, and it also something you might call high modernity, which for me it's the most important is what makes sense for Southeast Asia, but I hope these are somewhat meaningful categories for other parts of the world. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Reid. Yes, again, I have to remind you that this. Can you listen to me, everyone? Yes.
I can hear you.
Yes, thank you, Prof. We have to remind you that this very important activity is hosted by the Doctoral Program of History, Faculty of Humanities, Diponegoro University. This is one of our efforts to solve the problem in the social distance era. So in order to enhance and improve the quality of our thought knowledge, then this activity is hosted. And I hope that you can all have all the benefits in this fruitful guest lecture of today. So next questions will come from Inda Kartika. Do you have to read it? Okay, I would like to read from the chat room here. Indra Kartika, I think, I'm not sure if it is a Miss or Mr. But it is said here that Professor Reid explanation, he puts about Sri is important. But is there any plot how Sri struggled being an independent woman in that times? I want to know because from all your books or journal, you describe woman condition, not particular woman as feminist. Well, I'm not sure about the questions, but Professor Reid, I think Indah Kartika is asking about the characters of Sri and whether it is part of the feminist point of view or not. Maybe. Thank you.
Thank you, Indah. I think must be a lady. Yeah? Indeed, she is important, and I hope I make her seem very independent. I do contrast. Perhaps you've read the book, and you would have seen this. I do contrast. You know, when she faces the problem of who she should marry. She tells Hodges, well, my father, you know, wants me to marry this good Muslim, rather rich, rather strict Muslim who will disapprove of everything, because her mother is very Javanese, her father is ethnically quite mixed, but is trying to be a good Muslim. And so there is conflict. And she says, well, as long as my parents can't agree about anything, I'm free. You know, they can't, my mother will always, you know, prevent this marriage. But yeah, she is, of course, she is idealized perhaps as an independent woman with a lot of agency. It's a different way to make a point I've tried to make in my historical writing, as you perhaps know. I have made much of what I call autonomy. I don't call equality, I call it autonomy of Southeast Asian women, that because they have economic autonomy, they're not as European women or Chinese women or Indian women, they're not dependent on the man for livelihood, for income. They have their own means of livelihood, just as important as men, and in particular, they do business. And so it's this which gives them a kind of autonomy and a kind of balance, which is terribly important for the world. That's a big part of my work, is to try to make that point. With Sri, I suppose I romanticize her a little bit. I idealize her a little bit as yes, independent woman that might appeal to a modern feminist, and maybe I go too far to make her seem like a modern kind of woman. I mean, of course, being a woman in 1600 is a very different thing, and being a man is very different. And it's a much more dangerous and violent world, and so forth, in lots of ways. But yeah, that's what I'm doing. You correctly guessed, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Reid, we have also a questions from one of our students at the Doctorate Program on History, Mr. Rabitihan, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Hello, Professor Reid.
Hi.
I have a simple question. Can we use oral tradition as historical fact, and how to use it? Thank you very much.
I think you know very well it's not a simple question. It's a very complicated question. We of course we do use oral history when it's you know, when a court is trying to decide who killed, you know, did A or B or C kill X, we get witnesses, we get oral history, we get people to say, well, I think this is what happened, this is what I perceived. That is a kind of oral history. It's common sense. Of course you do use oral history, but the further back you go, the further away you are from the source, the less reliable an oral history is. And particularly perhaps in our modern society when there is so much written. And I mean, one notices when societies become literate, they forget their oral history. So my friend Jim Fox, who works with Roti and Nusa Tenggara Timor, complains that the only people who know the oral traditions are the old because they didn't have an education. Now you have an education, you forget. I mean, the importance of repeating the oral epic, the poem from like Ligo for the Bugis or so. I mean, these things are, when people are not so literate, there is a tradition of reciting, and that's maybe all you've got. But when you are comparing a written source from 1600 with an oral source, from the 20th century or 21st century, that is trying to remember that, of course you have to prefer the source from the period. I mean, but it's of course much more complicated than that. There's good oral history and lousy oral history.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Reid. And also Pak Rabitian. Do we have another questions?
Yes, I guess.
Wait, I have to read from the chat room again. It is from Anggiasti Rayung Wigasti. It is written here, I am Anggiasti from History Department, Gajah Mada University. I would like to ask a question regarding the adoption of events from other regions, like the scenes of the religion debate in Mataram, which you adopted from India, and I adapted it to Japanese setting. My questions, are there any guidelines that help make certain that his process of adoption from the original setting still fits well and not out of place to the target setting? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure whether to answer it as Anthony Reid, the professor, academic historian, or as I think I'll try to do it that way, because I think you're a historian, I'm a historian, and that's really what you're saying. I think for a fiction writer, you can do what you please. You're free. And so if it helps the imagination to borrow some things, then that's good. I do this myself in Southeast Asia in the Age of Commerce. Nasi Tenggara di Kurun Niaga. I did a lot of extending and it has been criticized because we know a fragment of information from here and then a fragment from there. I try to say from these fragments, there's a general pattern. And so I do it, for example, perhaps most controversially, we don't have very good sources for how the Islamization of Java happened. There's much oral history and much, Kuburan and Wali Songo and all that. But hard evidence is hard to come by. For the Philippines, the process of Christianization is very well documented by comparison, because the Spanish priests who were doing it, and some non-priests also, described it all in quite a lot of detail. So I I try to put these together. I try to put things together, and where there is stronger evidence in one place, I go with it, even though it's weaker in another place. So I tried to make a general picture of what I call the religious revolution in Southeast Asia. Some of the reasons why the old agama was no longer believable and these new religions came. So, I mean, I suppose it's a little bit dangerous, and there are, if you want to be very strictly limit everything to a particular source, then it's hard to write at all. You might say, I cannot write the history of Southeast Asia because I don't have data enough on Laos, or on Minangkabau or something. I only have on this other place. But I did do that. I tried to combine fragments from different places in Southeast Asia with modern knowledge like anthropology and sociology and so forth, and linguistics about the past, and to make a whole picture. And some people criticized that, said you have gone too far. Others probably think I didn't go far enough, and to make it a big picture. Susah. Okay, thank you for the question. Interesting question.
Oh, thank you, Professor Reid. I can see through your windows, it's getting darker.
Indeed it is.
Is it okay for you for another questions, or do you think it's
that's okay.
enough?
No.
How many questions more? Do you think it's okay for you?
Sure. Carry on. No, that's good.
Okay, carry on then.
Please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Reid.
I wish I could learn more about the people asking the questions, what they are doing. Maybe if you have time, you can ask them to explain what they're doing, what kind of history.
Okay, Prof. If you think it's okay with you, then I'm going to give an opportunity for somebody raising the hand. Safaat Rahman. Are you there, Mr. Safaat Rahman? No? Mr. Safaat Rahman? Okay, if not, then I'm going to read a question from the chat room. Can I see the chat room, please? Okay. Here we have a question from Eka Ningtyas. Professor Reid, I have read your novel Mataram, and I have a simple question. How do we, as historians, done our historical imagination to produce historical narrative that not only contain rigid facts, but are still interesting to read? Thanks.
Okay. Well, that is indeed the question and the challenge. But as I think I've said before, I did not limit myself to facts. I invented characters. The leading characters are wholly invented. I hope they are believable, that they might have existed. And I make the point that, of course, they are modeled a little bit on characters from elsewhere, other times and places that more is known about. But I invented these characters. I enjoyed these characters. They're mine. They're my creation. And it is easier that way to draw people in by creating a sympathetic character, a character that readers like to identify with. Now, I'm not as successful as many experienced novelists who do this all the time, become very good at that, at creating characters. But I enjoyed trying to do that and trying to create, especially the three key characters, Sri and Hodges and Romo, the three characters, and two of them are English, so it's not balanced, you might say. And Tim Hannigan's question made the same question, it was in a way the same. I mean, where do you place yourself in this spectrum? It is a big spectrum between total fiction and total factually based history, how much we create and how much we research. Because for this period, not too much is known. I felt more free to more imagination, less fact. But yeah, you can do it so many ways. And how to do it is to say, what is a success? I mean, I was hoping to get lots of readers. That was success, so I didn't get that. Not success. But there's also critical success. Critics like it. And then perhaps there is also just being authentic as a kind of success in my own mind. So hard to answer. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Professor Reid. It's very interesting. And we have another question from Mr. Agus Murdiastomo. I'm going to read it. He wrote here, what's the difference between historical novels and novels based on history, and how to edit them so that their sense of history is not dominant? Thank you. That's from Mr. Agus.
Yeah, thank you, Agus. Again, this seems to be the same question. And I don't know the answer. We can, as I said, there are so many ways of doing it. There isn't a right answer. And so much is done and out there. I suppose, and I can't pretend that I'm a success as a novelist. I think I know what I'm doing when I'm a historian, and I have had a certain success there. As a novelist, there are millions of novelists out there, and including most of them have a bit of history in it. And the question is how much. I think everything is possible, and I'm not the one to say that this way is right. But I suppose I know when I'm reading novels, I like to think that it's convincing about them. I mean, if the novel makes you think, I don't believe that. I don't believe anybody could do that, could behave like that at that time in that place. I don't believe it. Then it's lost something. So you must try to. I mean, I must, at least I try to keep the belief of the reader that this could have happened. This is sort of believable enough. But yes, there's so many ways to do it. We need perhaps to have many subcategories of historical fiction, because truly there are many, many types. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Reid. Another question from Syaharudin. You wrote here, how do we place literature in historical studies? Thank you. From Syaharudin.
Well, clearly, I mean, this is a much tested issue for Java or the Malay world. Can we use literature as a source? Or, I mean, if so, how? I, of course, as a historian, I think we must use everything we can as a source. So, I mean, since we have so few indigenous sources, Southeast Asian sources from the 16th, 17th, even 18th century, we have to use everything we can get. But if we read the Baba Tanah Jawa, it's true. It's better seen as literature than as history. It's not a factual chronicle, but it has useful material in it. Sejarah Melayu in Malay text, it's closer to being a factual history, at least in its more modern parts. So, I mean, one has to distinguish types of literature, but when you are, the tools of literary analysis are often useful for the historian to not accept, I mean, for example, the Sejarah Melayu, I know better. I mean, it's easier to handle than Baba Tanah Jawa, but it is telling a moral. It is explaining, it is a didactic text that is explaining about what the subject owes to the ruler and what the ruler owes to the subject. And this is repeated in very many stories. And you see what the author is doing with these stories. And so this, you have to know some of the techniques of analyzing literature as literature in order to use it in an informed way as a historian. But you must use it. I mean, you must use anything that gives you an insight into what the people who wrote it, since the people who wrote it were in the 17th century and the 16th century, they are valuable sources. So you want to know what they are thinking and what they're doing. But you must handle it with due expertise. So literary techniques can be helpful. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Reid. I'm aware that it is now 6:30 p.m. in your place. So, okay, actually there are still so many participants who would like to ask questions, but let me write comments from Mr. Muhammad Samsudin from University Kebangsaan Malaysia. He wrote here, excellent talk by Tony. Tony's work will encourage more people, especially with the historical background, to write a novel. So I think we have a very great comment from Mr. Samsudin for Professor Reid. So I'm really the Doctorate Program of History Department here. Would like to thanks to all the people, the participants, the committee, and everyone engaged in these events. I would like to read a list of country of the participants here. We have some participants from Australia, France, Germany, USA, UK, Ireland, Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, Nepal, Philippines, Bangladesh, India, and Indonesia. I believe this is going to be a good step for everyone, so that we can have, like what Professor Reid said. He said, I do not limit on facts. I would like to quote some of Professor Reid thought here. I like, he said, think global. Everybody is in contact with everyone else. Also, writing is liberating. I like the chance to have a conflict between 2 points of view. I think those are some thoughts that we can put in our mind in order to be good scholars. And again, thank you very much, Professor Reid, for addressing this interesting topic. On behalf of the head of Doctoral Program of History, Faculty of Humanities, Diponegoro University, allow us to extend our deepest gratitude for sharing your knowledge and teaching us all the beauty of learning history. This shall remind us to respect every moment in the past, to value what we have today, and to positively envisage the future. Thank you, Professor Reid. Thank you, all participants. Thank you, committee. I hope we can see again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, before we leave, Professor Reid, would you like to have a closing remark for us all, please?
Okay, well, just to thank you.
Before we leave, Professor Reid, would
Can I say something? Just to say thank you for your participation, and congratulations on your excellent English. I don't know why I bothered with the Indonesian. Your English is so much better than my Indonesian. So I'm amazed at that. That's the first time I've been right through a lecture in Indonesia where we didn't have any Indonesian coming. Hope and we will all be congratulated on that. All ready for taking on the world. So thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure and privilege to be part of your graduate program in maritime history.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Reid. It's an honor to meet you today, and also it's an honor to meet all participants today. Thank you.
Okay.